I never expected grief to look like a subpoena. When I returned to Marrow Glen to bury my father, my sister Caroline didn't bring a casserole. She brought a litigation team. She wanted the house, the money, and the history rewritten in her favor. I thought I was losing everything until a stranger in a black suit walked into the courtroom. The judge froze, and I realized my father hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me a weapon. The rain in Marrow Glen did not wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. I stood under the awning of the funeral home, watching the black sedans line up like beetles on the wet pavement. It was November, the kind of Ohio gray that settled in your bones and refused to leave. I was 33 years old, shivering in a coat that wasn't quite warm enough. Burying a father I had only just started to know again. My sister, Caroline, did not shiver. Caroline Wynne stood 10 feet away, flanked by her husband, Mark, and 2 assistants who looked more like bodyguards. She wore a black coat that probably cost more than my car. Structured and severe, her blonde hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked painful. She was checking her phone. When she saw me looking, she didn't offer a sad smile or a sisterly nod. She just slipped the phone into her purse and adjusted her leather gloves. We were here for Richard Bell, a man who had been a quiet mystery to me for most of my adult life and a balance sheet to her. "Come inside, Anna," she said. Her voice was perfectly modulated. The voice of a woman who led board meetings and fired people over Zoom. "People are waiting." I followed her in. The room smelled of lilies and floor wax. I expected grief to hit me in waves, but mostly I felt a dull, thumping anxiety. I had spent the last 6 weeks living in my father's guest room, listening to his breathing rattle in his chest, making soup he didn't eat, and reading aloud to him from old history books. Caroline had visited twice, both times. She had stayed for less than 45 minutes, keeping her coat on, checking her watch, asking the nurse pointed questions about medication dosages. Now, she was accepting condolences from the mayor and the town council with the grace of a visiting diplomat. I stood by the register, signing my name, Anna Bell. It looked small on the page. "I'm so sorry for your loss," a woman whispered to me. I recognized her vaguely. "Mrs. Gable, a neighbor. Your father was a good man. It's a shame about the confusion at the end." I paused, the pen hovering over the paper. Confusion? Mrs. Gable looked flustered, her eyes darting toward Caroline. "Oh, just, his memory, the stress." Caroline mentioned he was having a hard time distinguishing reality those last few months. My stomach tightened. My father had been tired. Yes, he had been in pain, but he hadn't been confused. 2 days before he died, he had beaten me at chess and corrected my grammar in a crossword puzzle. He was sharp as a tack. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice sounding louder than I intended. Caroline turned her head. Her eyes met mine. Cool and unreadable. "Let's not debate medical history at the memorial." "Anna," she said, "it's unseemly. That was the first crack in the ice. I didn't know then that the ice went down for miles, and I was already standing on the fault line. The reading of the will took place 3 days later at Hollis Strain LLP. The firm occupied a brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and cigar smoke. Mr. Strain was 80 years old if he was a day, a man with liver spots on his hands and a tremor that made the papers rattle as he shuffled them. Caroline sat on a leather wingback chair, legs crossed at the ankle. She had brought her own lawyer, a man named Darrow Klein. Klein was 40, wearing a suit that was too blue and a watch that was too big. He didn't look like a probate lawyer. He looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright. I sat alone on the sofa. "Mr. Strain cleared his throat. "Richard was a man of detail," the lawyer said. "He updated his will 6 months ago. The terms are quite specific. I saw Caroline's posture stiffen, just a fraction. To my daughter, Caroline Wynne. Mr. Strain read, "I leave the entirety of my liquid assets held in the primary brokerage accounts, totaling $4,200,000, along with the vacation property in Lake Genevieve." I blinked. It was a fortune. I looked at Caroline, expecting relief, maybe even a smug satisfaction. But she wasn't smiling. Her jaw was set so hard, a muscle feathered in her cheek. She looked insulted. To my daughter, Annabelle, Mr. Strain continued. I leave the family residence at 44 Elm Street, and the controlling interest, 60% of the shares, in Belridge Holdings. The silence in the room was absolute. Belridge Holdings? I asked. I knew the name. Of course, it was the small holding company my father used for his local business dealings. A few commercial leases, a warehouse or two. It wasn't the cash cow. It was the workhorse. Caroline stood up. This is a joke. It is the last will and testament of your father, Mr. Strain said, his voice trembling but firm. He wasn't in his right mind. Caroline snapped. She turned to Klein. You see? This proves it. He gives the cash to me to keep me quiet, but he hands the control to her? She can't even balance a checkbook. She's a freelance illustrator. For God's sake, she doesn't know the first thing about asset management. I stood up too. My legs felt shaky. I was there. Caroline, I was there every day. He knew exactly what he was doing. Klein stepped forward, placing a hand on Caroline's arm to silence her. He looked at Mr. Strain, then at me. His smile was razor-thin. Mr. Strain, we will be contesting this will formally by the end of the week. We are requesting full medical records dating back 12 months. We are also filing an emergency petition to freeze the assets of the estate pending a competency hearing. You can't do that, I said. The bills. The funeral costs. We are alleging undue influence. Ms. Bell, Klein said to me. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it worse. You were alone with him for 6 weeks. You isolated him from his other daughter. You controlled his medication. You controlled his communications. I isolated him? I felt the blood rush to my face. She didn't visit. I called her every day. And we will be reviewing those call logs. Klein said, if Richard Bell was coerced into altering his estate plan to favor the child who was physically preventing him from contacting his other advisors, the court will rectify it. Caroline looked at me then. It wasn't hatred in her eyes. It was something colder. It was dismissal. I'm sorry it has to be this way. Anna, she said, but I can't let you ruin what he built just because you needed a payday. They walked out. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, leaving me in the silence of the office with a trembling old man. Mr. Strain took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I warned him. He muttered, I told Richard this would happen. The reality of litigation is not dramatic. It is bureaucratic and humiliating. 2 days after the reading, I went to the grocery store to buy milk, eggs, and a bottle of cheap wine. I swiped my debit card. Declined. I tried it again. Declined. The cashier, a teenager popping gum, looked at the line forming behind me. Do you have another card? I pulled out my credit card. It was a joint account I had been on with my father for emergencies. Used to pay for his prescriptions. Declined. I felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of my neck. I apologized, left the groceries on the belt, and walked out to my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys in a puddle. I called the bank from the parking lot. After 20 minutes of hold music, a representative told me my accounts had been flagged for review due to a court order involving the estate, because my personal finances were entangled with the estate's reimbursement transfers from the last month. Everything was frozen. I had $42 in cash in my wallet. That was it. I sat in my car and cried. Not the pretty, single-tear crying you see in movies. I cried until my chest hurt. Ugly. Heaving sobs that fogged up the windows. Caroline wasn't just suing me. She was sieging me. She knew I didn't have the reserves to fight her. She was banking on me starving before we ever got to a judge. I drove back to the house on Elm Street. It was a big, drafty Victorian that my father had loved and my mother had tolerated. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. I walked into his study. It was exactly as he had left it. The smell of pipe tobacco and lemon polish hung in the air. I sat in his leather chair, the leather creaking under me. Why did you do this, Dad? I whispered. Why didn't you just split it down the middle? I looked at the desk. It was a chaotic mess of papers, books, and old coffee mugs. My father was a brilliant man, but he was not organized. I started shifting through the piles, looking for, I didn't know what, a sign, an explanation. I picked up a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. It was heavy. As I lifted it, a white envelope slid out from between the pages. It was sealed with wax, red wax. My father had a flair for the dramatic, but this felt excessive even for him. On the front, in his jagged handwriting, "To Anna. Open only if the worst happens." My heart hammered against my ribs. I broke the seal. The letter was handwritten on his personal stationery. "Anna, if you are reading this, Caroline has not accepted the will. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped her ambition had limits, but I am a realist. She will try to crush you with procedure. She will try to starve you out. Do not let her. There is a firm in Greystone City called Sable Fiduciary Services. Contact them. Tell them Richard Bell sent you. Do not tell anyone else you are calling them. And Anna, do not trust anyone who arrives smiling. The wolves in this town don't howl. They offer to help. Love, Dad." I read it 3 times. Sable Fiduciary Services. It sounded like a bank or an accounting firm, but the tone of the letter, it was frightened. My father, who had stared down union strikes and market crashes, sounded afraid. I put the letter in my pocket. I looked at the desk again. Something was wrong. I had been in here yesterday to water the ferns. I remembered moving a stack of magazines to the corner of the desk to make room for the watering can. Now, the magazines were in the center of the desk, and the top drawer, the one where he kept his checkbook and his passport, was open. Just a millimeter. A sliver of darkness. I froze. The house was silent. The floorboards settled with a groan. I walked to the drawer and pulled it open. The checkbook was there. The passport was there. But the papers underneath, they were shuffled. The edges weren't aligned. Someone had lifted them, looked through them, and put them back in a hurry. I wasn't paranoid. Someone had been in the house. I checked the windows. Locked. The back door? Locked. But my father had hidden a spare key under the planter on the back porch for 20 years. Everyone knew it was there. Caroline knew it was there. I went to the back porch. I lifted the planter. The key was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I pushed a heavy armchair in front of my bedroom door and sat up with the lights on, holding my phone like a talisman. The next morning, Caroline texted me. "Lark Lumen. 11 a.m. Let's stop this nonsense." I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I had $42, a frozen bank account, and a letter that terrified me. I needed to see her face. I needed to know how far she was willing to go. Lark Lumen was the kind of cafe that served avocado toast for $18 and played acoustic covers of pop songs. It was bright, airy, and full of people who looked like they had never worried about a grocery bill in their lives. Caroline was already seated at a corner table. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and sipping sparkling water. She looked soft, maternal. "Almost. Anna," she said, waving me over. "You look tired. Have you been sleeping?" I sat down. I didn't take off my coat. "Where is your shark?" I asked. She sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. "Darrow isn't here. This is just us. Sisters." She signaled the waiter. "Bring her the quiche and a coffee." Black. She remembered how I took my coffee. It was a small thing, but it disarmed me. "Look," she said, leaning in. "This lawsuit, it's ugly. I hate it. It's dragging Dad's name through the mud. It's hurting the family. You filed it." "Caroline?" "Because I had to," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Dad wasn't himself. Anna, he gave you Belridge. Do you even know what Belridge does? It's a liability nightmare. It's commercial paper. It's tenant disputes. It's tax complexity. He gave you a burden. I'm trying to relieve you of it. By taking it for yourself? By managing it. Look," she pulled a folder from her bag. "I have a proposal. We settle this today. No more lawyers. No more court." She slid the paper across the table. "I sign over the house and the Belridge shares to you. In exchange, You get a clean cash payout, $500,000, immediate wire transfer. I'll unfreeze your accounts by this afternoon. You can go back to your life. You can travel. You can paint. You can be free. $500,000. It was a lot of money. It was enough to fix my life. But the house alone was worth $400,000. And the company? I didn't know what the company was worth. But if Caroline wanted it this badly, it wasn't a liability. I looked at her. She was smiling. It was a sad, sympathetic smile. Do not trust anyone who arrives smiling. Why? I asked. Why do you want the company? Caroline? You have the millions. You have the vacation house. Why do you need the small holding company? She didn't blink. Sentiment. Dad started it in the garage. I want to preserve it. You'll just let it rot. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm. Anna, please. You're drowning. I can see it. Let me help you. Just sign the paper. I looked at her hand on mine. It felt like a trap. It felt like the drawer left open a millimeter. I pulled my hand away. No. Caroline's smile vanished. It didn't fade. It just ceased to exist. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not signing anything. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her sparkling water and took a sip. You're making a mistake. Anna. A very expensive mistake. I stood up. I think I'll take my chances. I walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back, but I could feel her eyes on my spine, drilling holes. I needed a lawyer, but I couldn't afford Darrow Klein. I couldn't afford anyone who had an office in the glass towers downtown. I found Mina Crowell in the phone book. Her office was above a dry cleaner on 4th Street. The sign on the door said, Mina Crowell, attorney at law in peeling vinyl letters. I walked in. The waiting room was a hallway with 2 plastic chairs. Mina came out to greet me herself. She was a short woman with frizzy hair and ink stains on her fingers. She looked like a librarian who had been in a bar fight. You're the bell girl, she said. I heard about the filing. Everyone in town heard about the filing. Can you help me? I asked. I can't pay you much. Not yet. Come in, she said. Mina's office was a disaster of files and coffee cups. But when she listened, she was intense. She didn't interrupt. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching furiously. When I finished telling her about the will, the freeze, and the brunch, she sat back and chewed on the end of her pen. She's running a shock and awe campaign. Mina said, it's a classic bully tactic. She freezes your money so you can't fight back. She offers you a lowball settlement that looks like a lifeline. She paints you as unstable so that anything you say sounds like hysteria. She wants a third-party administrator. I said, Klein mentioned it. Right, Mina leaned forward. If she convinces the judge you're incompetent or that there's too much conflict, the court appoints a neutral administrator to run the estate. And do you know who usually gets picked for those lists? Lawyers who play golf with Darrow Klein. They'll drain the estate in fees and sell the assets, to her, for pennies on the dollar. I felt sick. How do we stop her? We have to prove you're competent. We have to prove the will is valid, and we have to find out why she wants that company so badly. Mina started digging through a stack of papers on her desk. But there's something else. She said, I did a little digging this morning when I saw you were coming in. I have a friend who works at the nursing agency that supplied your father's caregivers. She pulled out a sheet of paper. Caroline's team interviewed 3 of the nurses last week. Last week? I said. But Dad only died 10 days ago. Exactly. Mina's eyes were hard. She was building this case before he was even cold. Anna. And look at this. She pointed to a line of text. My friend said the investigator asked very specific questions. Did Anna ever prevent you from entering the room? Did Anna ever change the medication schedule? Did Anna ever speak negatively about Caroline? They were scripted questions. I whispered. They were building a narrative. Mina corrected. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for sound bites they could twist. She's already got the neighbors thinking you're crazy. I heard Mrs. Gable at the grocery store telling the cashier you were having episodes on the front lawn. My hands curled into fists. I haven't had episodes. I know, Mina said. But in probate court, perception is reality. We are behind. Anna, way behind. She has the money, she has the narrative, and she has the head start. What do we do? Mina sighed. We fight. But I need you to be ready. They are going to come for everything. Your medical records, your texts, your emails. They will try to find one grain of dirt and turn it into a landslide. I nodded. I was ready, or I thought I was. I left Mina's office as the sun was setting. The streetlights were flickering on, casting long orange shadows on the wet pavement. I felt a strange sense of clarity. Caroline wanted a fight. She thought I was weak. She thought I was the little sister who drew pictures and cried at sad movies. She didn't know about the letter. I sat in my car and pulled the envelope out of my pocket. Sable Fiduciary Services. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Sable Fiduciary. A woman's voice answered. Cool. Professional. Hello, I said. My name is Anna Bell. My father told me to call. There was a silence on the other end. Not a pause. A complete, dead silence. Who is your father? The woman asked. Her voice had changed. It was sharper. Richard Bell, of Marrow Glen. The silence stretched out again. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. Ms. Bell, the woman said. Please hold. I waited. My heart was thumping in my throat. A moment later, she came back on the line. Ms. Bell, we have an opening for an urgent consultation at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Our office is in Greystone City. Can you make it? Yes, I can be there. Good. Bring the letter. Bring identification. And Ms. Bell, yes? Do not tell anyone you are coming. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. My father hadn't just left me a will. He had left me a plan, and for the first time since he died. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a player in a game I was just beginning to understand. I started the car and drove north, toward the house that was no longer a home, but a battlefield. The rain started again, harder this time, washing away the dust but leaving the mud. Tomorrow, I would find out what the wolves were really hunting. Greystone City was not like Marrow Glen. It was a place of steel and glass, where the buildings scraped the low-hanging clouds and the wind whipped through the avenues with a biting precision. I drove my father's old sedan into the city, the engine humming a nervous rhythm. The GPS led me to a building that looked less like an office and more like a fortress, a monolith of gray stone with narrow windows that seemed to squint at the street below. Sable Fiduciary Services occupied the 14th floor. The elevator ride was silent and fast. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a lobby that smelled of nothing. No coffee, no perfume, no cleaning chemicals, just the scent of filtered air and cold money. I approached the receptionist. She was a woman of indeterminate age with glasses that reflected the light so perfectly I couldn't see her eyes. I have an appointment, I said. Anna Bell. She didn't ask for ID. She didn't check a computer. She simply nodded and pressed a button under her desk. Mr. Morrow is expecting you. End of the hall. The door is open. I walked down a corridor lined with abstract art that looked like bruised metal. The office at the end was sparse. There was a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that offered a view of the gray river cutting through the city. Elliot Morrow stood up as I entered. He was a man made of right angles, square jaw, sharp shoulders, a haircut that didn't dare to be out of place. He wore a gray suit that matched the walls. Ms. Bell, he said. His voice was dry, like paper sliding against paper. Please, sit. I sat. I pulled the letter my father had left me from my purse and placed it on the desk. My father told me to come here. I said. He said, if the worst happens. Elliot glanced at the letter but didn't touch it. We are aware of Richard's instructions. He said, we have been monitoring the probate filings in Marrow County. We saw the petition filed by your sister's legal team yesterday. You were watching? I asked. We are fiduciaries. Ms. Bell. Our job is to watch. He opened a file on his desk. It was thin. Your father established a conditional trust mechanism 3 years ago. Elliot said, It is a dormant instrument. It sits quietly inside the estate structure, invisible to standard asset searches. It was designed to activate only under specific triggers. Triggers? Hostile actions, Elliot clarified. If a beneficiary contests the validity of the will, alleges undue influence without criminal evidence, or attempts to remove the named executor through emergency ex parte motions, the mechanism wakes up. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. My sister has done all of those things, I said. Elliot nodded once. Precisely. By filing for an emergency freeze and alleging you manipulated your father. Caroline Wynne has effectively turned the key. What does that mean? I asked. Does the money go away? No, Elliot said. He leaned forward slightly, clasping his hands. It means the administration of the estate is removed from the family's control. If she pushes this to a certain legal threshold, Sable Fiduciary Services steps in as a special administrator. We pause the distribution, we audit everything, and we decide who is actually complying with Richard's wishes. I stared at him. You take over? Temporarily, to protect the assets. Does Caroline know this? Elliot allowed a very small, very dry smile to touch his lips. No, that is the point of a trap. Ms. Bell, it only works if the predator does not see it. He pushed a folder toward me. However, Elliot continued, the activation is not immediate. The court must recognize the hostility of her actions. You need to let her make her case. You need to let her overreach. She's already overreaching. I said, she's freezing me out. I can't pay my bills. Elliot opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. The trust has a provision for the defense of the named executor. We can advance you funds for legal fees and living expenses, secured against your future inheritance. You will not starve, Ms. Bell, and you will not be bullied into a settlement. He slid the checkbook across the desk. Go back to Marrow Glen. Let your lawyer file her responses. Do not tell your sister about us. When the time is right, we will introduce ourselves to the court. I took the checkbook. It felt heavy in my hand. Why did he do this? I asked. Why didn't he just tell her to back off? Elliot looked at the window, at the gray river churning below. Because Richard believed that character is revealed under pressure. He said, he wanted to see what your sister would do when she didn't get what she wanted, and I suspect he wanted you to see it too. I drove back to Marrow Glen with the checkbook in my purse and a strange, cold comfort in my chest. My father hadn't just left me money. He had left me a shield. But a shield is only useful if you know how to hold it. I spent the next 3 days turning the house upside down. If Caroline was going to claim I manipulated our father, I needed to prove that Richard Bell was the captain of his own ship until the very end. I emptied boxes of receipts onto the dining room table. I went through his calendar, day by day. I found his phone, which Caroline's team hadn't thought to confiscate yet, and I scrolled through months of texts. It was tedious work, but as I pieced it together, a picture emerged. It wasn't the picture of a confused old man. It was the picture of a man tying up loose ends. I found a receipt from a bookstore in October. He had bought a book on local zoning laws and a biography of Ulysses S. Grant. I found a text to his barber. Cancel Thursday. Feeling tired. Let's try next week. Lucid. Polite. I found a calendar entry from 2 weeks before he died. Review Greenridge compliance. Greenridge. The name sparked a memory. Something vague. I wrote it down. But the most damning evidence against Caroline's narrative was the small stuff. The grocery lists written in his steady hand, the crossword puzzles completed in pen, the fact that he had called his broker 3 times in September to confirm the beneficiary designations on his accounts. He knew. I whispered to the empty room. He knew exactly what he was doing. I was building a fortress of paper. But outside my walls, the siege was getting louder. It started with a notification on my phone. A friend from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in 10 years, sent me a screenshot. Have you seen this? It was from a local anonymous gossip page on social media. Marrow Glen whispers. Sad to hear about the Bell family feud. Money really brings out the worst in people. Rumor has it the younger daughter is squatting in the house and refusing to let the family appraise the antiques. Disrespectful to the legacy. Squatting. I looked around the living room. I was born in this house. Then came the polite encounters. I went to the post office to mail a bill. Mrs. Higgins, the postmistress who had given me lollipops when I was 5, took my envelope with a stiff, formal nod. I heard there's some trouble with the will. Anna, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Caroline was in here yesterday. She seemed very upset. Said she's just worried about your stability. My stability. It was a brilliant word. It wasn't an accusation. It was a concern. It made Caroline look like the caring big sister and me look like a volatile liability. I'm fine. Mrs. Higgins, I said, forcing a smile. Caroline worries too much. Mrs. Higgins didn't look convinced. She looked like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. I took my evidence to Mina Crowell's office on Thursday. She looked even more disheveled than before, her desk buried under a new avalanche of files. This is good, Mina said, flipping through the calendar pages I had copied. This establishes capacity. If he was researching zoning laws, he wasn't navigating a dementia fog. She tossed the file onto the pile and leaned back, rubbing her temples. But we have a weirder problem. Anna, what? I've been going through Caroline's petition again. The numbers don't add up. I frowned. What do you mean? In her filing, she lists the estimated value of the estate. She claims the liquid assets should be in the range of $10 million. $10 million? I shook my head. Dad did well. But I don't think he had $10 million in cash. The will said $4 million in the brokerage accounts. Exactly, Mina said. But Caroline is insisting on 10. She's claiming that $6 million is missing. She's implying that you, or someone, siphoned it off before he died. That's insane. I didn't touch his money. I know you didn't. Mina tapped the petition with her pen. But here's the thing. Caroline isn't stupid. She wouldn't put a number like that in a court filing unless she had a reason to believe it existed. She thinks there's a hole in the estate. She's using the discovery process to hunt for it. She thinks I stole $6 million? Or she thinks your father hid it. Mina looked at me sharply. Anna, was there ever talk of other accounts? Offshore? A safe deposit box? No, Dad was simple. He liked municipal bonds and real estate. Mina chewed on her lip. Well, she's chasing a ghost, but she's going to tear your life apart looking for it. She's demanding forensic accounting on Belridge Holdings. Belridge? I said, that's the company I inherited. Right. If the money isn't in the bank, she thinks it's buried in the company. We need to know what's in those books before her auditors get there. Belridge Holdings operated out of a single-story brick building on the edge of town, near the old rail yard. It was the kind of place you drove past 1,000 times and never noticed. I had the key. I unlocked the front door and stepped into a reception area that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1995. Beige carpet, beige walls, a ficus tree that was fighting for its life in the corner. There were 3 employees. Mrs. Halloway, the office manager, was a woman in her 60s with a face etched by worry lines. She jumped when I walked in. Anna, she gasped. I mean, Ms. Bell. We weren't sure when you would come. I'm here. Mrs. Halloway, I said gently. Please, call me Anna. She introduced me to the others. David, a young accountant who looked terrified, and Sarah, who handled property maintenance. They were loyal. I could feel it, but they were also scared. Your sister's lawyers sent us a letter. David said, his voice cracking. Preservation of evidence. They said if we delete a single email, we could be held in contempt. Don't delete anything. I said, we have nothing to hide. I asked Mrs. Halloway to show me the books. Not the digital ones, but the old ledgers my father kept. He didn't trust the cloud. He trusted ink. She led me to a back room lined with filing cabinets. Your father was worried in the last few months, Mrs. Halloway said quietly as she pulled a heavy binder from a shelf. Worried about what? Cash flow, she said. He was moving money around, not taking it out, just shifting it. He kept talking about a loan that wasn't really a loan that wasn't a loan? That's what he called it. He said, "The marker is coming due. Mary." I didn't know what he meant. She opened the binder. I traced the columns of figures. It was mostly rent checks and maintenance invoices. But then, on a page from 5 years ago, I saw it. Green Ridge Supply Company. It was an entry for $50,000, but it wasn't an expense. It was listed under restricted grant matching obligation. I looked closer. There were more entries, every year, a matching amount. And next to the last one, a note in my father's handwriting. Shortfall covered by silent backer. Do not list in main audit. Silent backer. I felt a prickle of unease. My father ran a transparent business. He hated debt. He hated secrets. Who was the silent backer? And why was he covering shortfalls for a supply company? I need copies of these pages. Mrs. Halloway, I said, and anything else you have on Green Ridge. We don't have much, she said. It's just a file. But Anna, be careful. Why? Because whenever your father dealt with that file, he closed the blinds. I went home with the copies in my bag. My mind racing. Green Ridge, silent backer, missing millions. It felt like I was trying to read a book where half the pages had been torn out. I was in the kitchen, making tea. When the front door opened, I froze. I hadn't changed the locks yet. Caroline walked in. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She just walked into the house like she still lived there. She was wearing riding clothes, breeches, tall boots, a quilted vest. She looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog for country aristocrats. "Hello, Anna," she said. I put the kettle down. "You can't just walk in here." "Caroline, it's still probate," she said, pulling off her gloves. "Technically, it belongs to the estate, which means it belongs to both of us until the judge says otherwise." She walked to the fridge and opened it, peering inside with a critical eye. "You're out of milk," she observed. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to see the house. It's been a while." She closed the fridge and turned to lean against the counter. She looked at me, really looked at me, with that same terrifying calmness she had displayed at the cafe. "Do you remember the summer we went to the Cape?" she asked. I blinked. The sudden pivot threw me off. "We never went to the Cape," I said. "We went to the Outer Banks." Caroline shook her head, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. "No, Anna. We went to Cape Cod. You were 7, I was 12. You fell off the dock and cut your leg. Don't you remember? Dad had to carry you back to the rental house." I frowned. I did cut my leg. I had a scar on my shin to prove it. But I remembered sand dunes, not a dock. I remembered the humid heat of North Carolina. Not the cold Atlantic. It was the Outer Banks. I insisted. Caroline laughed softly. "God, your memory is just like Mom's was. Swiss cheese. It was the Cape. Anna, I have photos. You were screaming so loud the neighbors called the police. You were always so dramatic. Even then." She pushed off the counter and walked toward me. "That's why Dad was worried. You know, he knew you perceived things differently. He knew you rewrote history to fit your emotions." I felt a sudden, sharp spike of doubt. Was it the Cape? Was I wrong? The memory felt slippery now, tainted by her certainty. "Stop it," I said. "You're trying to gaslight me." "I'm trying to help you see reality," she said. "Just like I'm trying to help you with this estate. You think you're fighting for Dad, but you're just fighting for your own version of the past, a version that doesn't exist." She stopped in front of me. She smelled of expensive soap and horses. "Give it up, Anna. Before the court dates start, before the lawyers strip you bare. You have skeletons. Little sister, we all do. Do you really want Darrow Klein pulling them out one by one?" I held my ground, though my knees were shaking. "Get out of my house, Caroline." She stared at me for a long second, then she shrugged. "Our house, Anna. For now." She turned and walked out. I listened to the door click shut, and then the sound of her Range Rover peeling out of the driveway. I sank onto the floor. I pulled up my pant leg and looked at the scar on my shin. I closed my eyes and tried to smell the ocean. Was it the Cape? It didn't matter. What mattered was that she could make me doubt it. That was her power. She didn't just attack the future, she attacked the past. 2 days later, the subpoena arrived. I was at Mina's office when the process server walked in. He handed me a thick envelope and left without a word. I opened it. My hands were trembling. Subpoena ducis tecum. It was a demand for records. But not financial records. All medical and psychological records regarding the treatment of Annabelle, including but not limited to therapy notes, prescription history, and counseling summaries from the years 2018 to present. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "They want my therapy notes?" I whispered. Mina snatched the paper from my hand. She scanned it, her face turning red. "This is dirty," she spat. "This is incredibly dirty. I saw a therapist for 6 months after a bad breakup 3 years ago. I talked about my anxiety. I talked about feeling overshadowed by Caroline. I talked about my father. If Caroline got those notes, she would have a roadmap to my insecurities. She would have ammunition to paint me as unstable, jealous, and mentally fragile. She can't have these," I said, my voice rising. "Mina, this is private." "It is," Mina said, slamming the paper down, "and we are going to fight it. I'm filing a protective motion immediately. Relevance is the standard, and your therapy 3 years ago has zero relevance to your father's will. But the judge might allow it?" Mina hesitated. "Judge Vance is fair, but Klein will argue that your mental state is relevant to the undue influence claim. He'll argue that you were emotionally dependent on your father." I put my head in my hands. The violation felt physical. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a way of stripping me naked in a public square. "She's not going to stop, is she?" I asked. "No," Mina said quietly. "She's not. Which means we can't stop either." The day of the first preliminary hearing arrived with a leaden sky. The air was thick with the threat of snow. I dressed in a dark blue suit I had bought at a thrift store. It fit well enough, but I felt like a child playing dress-up compared to Caroline's inevitable couture. Mina drove me to the courthouse. It was an old stone building with steps worn down by a century of boots. "We're just setting the schedule today," Mina said as we parked. "The judge will decide on the discovery motions. We'll fight the therapy subpoena. Just keep your face blank. Don't let her see you react." I nodded. Blank. I could do blank. We walked toward the steps. The plaza was crowded with lawyers, clerks, and people smoking nervously near the ash cans. Then I saw them. Caroline was standing near the entrance. She was flanked by Darrow Klein and 2 junior associates. They looked like a phalanx of expensive wool and confidence, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking at a car that had just pulled up to the curb. It was a black town car, no markings. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall. He wore a black suit that was tailored to perfection, but it wasn't the flashy style of Darrow Klein. It was severe, minimalist. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt buttoned to the collar. He carried no briefcase. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like an undertaker for governments. Caroline's team stiffened. Darrow Klein took a half-step forward, his hand extended, a smile plastered on his face. The man didn't take the hand. He stopped in front of them. He nodded once, a sharp, precise movement. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. He handed it to Klein, not aggressively, but with the casual indifference of someone handing a waiter a tip. Klein looked at the paper. His smile faltered. He looked up, but the man was already moving. The stranger turned and walked up the courthouse steps. He passed within 5 feet of me. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the heavy wooden doors. "Who is that?" I whispered to Mina. Mina was frowning. "I don't know. I've never seen him in Merrow County before." The man disappeared inside the building. I looked back at Caroline. She was staring at the doors, her face pale. Darrow Klein was reading the slip of paper, his brow furrowed in confusion. For the first time since this nightmare began, Caroline looked unsure. I touched the pocket of my coat, where the checkbook from Sable Fiduciary rested. "Do not trust anyone who arrives smiling." The man in the black suit hadn't smiled. "Let's go," I said to Mina. We walked up the steps. into the belly of the court, following the stranger who had just made the sharks flinch. The Honorable Lenora H. Vance did not look like a woman who suffered fools, and she certainly did not look like she enjoyed family drama. She sat high on the bench of the Merrill County Probate Court, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair cut into a sharp bob and reading glasses perched on the very end of her nose. The courtroom smelled of lemon furniture polish and stale anxiety. It was a small room, paneled in dark oak that had absorbed a century of lies and pleas. I sat at the plaintiff's table, though technically, as the named executor, I was the defendant against my sister's petition, next to Mina Crowell. Mina looked small next to the pile of binders she had constructed as a barricade across the aisle. Darrow Klein and his team occupied their table like an invading army. They had sleek laptops, leather folios, and water pitchers that didn't sweat. Caroline sat in the center of them. She wore a charcoal suit that was conservative, expensive, and impeccably tailored. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge with an expression of pained respect. Judge Vance opened the file in front of her. She flipped a page, the sound loud in the silent room. "We are here on the matter of the estate of Richard Bell," she said. Her voice was a low alto, dry as dust. "We have an emergency petition for the removal of the named executor and the appointment of a third-party administrator, filed by Ms. Wynne, Mr. Klein. You may proceed." Klein stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a single, fluid motion. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dropping into a register of somber concern. "This is not a filing we made lightly. Caroline Wynne is a devoted daughter who only wants to ensure her father's legacy is protected, but the facts are undeniable. Richard Bell was 82 years old. In his final months, he was isolated, medicated, and subjected to the undue influence of his younger daughter, who had previously been absent from his life." I gripped the edge of the table. Absent. I had been living in Chicago, working 3 jobs. I called every Sunday. Klein continued. "The result of this influence is a will that defies logic. It hands control of a complex commercial entity to an individual with no financial experience, while stripping the family's most competent financial steward, my client, of any oversight. We are asking the court to pause, to breathe, to appoint a neutral professional to secure the assets before they are dissipated by incompetence or malice." He sat down. It was a good speech. It sounded reasonable. Judge Vance looked at Mina. "Ms. Crowell?" Mina stood up. She didn't button a jacket. She just smoothed her skirt. "Your Honor, Mr. Klein is telling a very compelling story, but probate court deals in evidence, not stories, and the evidence shows that Richard Bell was lucid, deliberate, and entirely in control of his decisions. The isolation Mr. Klein refers to was simply a dying man asking for peace." Judge Vance peered over her glasses. "I have read the briefs. I want to hear from the petitioner. Ms. Wynne, please take the stand." Caroline rose. She walked to the witness box with a slow, dignified gait. She took the oath, her hand steady. "Ms. Wynne?" Klein asked, standing near the podium. "Why are you contesting this will?" Caroline looked at the judge, then at me. Her eyes softened. It was a look of profound pity, because I know my sister. She said gently, "Anna is a wonderful person. She is creative. She is passionate. But she is also... she gets overwhelmed." Objection. Mina said, "Speculation. Overruled." The judge said, "Go on." Caroline sighed. "When our mother died, Anna couldn't handle the arrangements. She shut down. When Dad got sick, she came back. Yes, but I saw the toll it took on her. She was frantic. She was paranoid. I believe, truly, that Dad changed the will because he was trying to soothe her anxiety. He didn't want her to worry about money. So he gave her the company, not realizing she wouldn't know how to run it. I'm doing this to save her from a responsibility that will crush her. It was masterful. She wasn't painting me as a villain. She was painting me as a broken child who needed to be managed. She was using my grief as proof of my incompetence." Mina stood up for cross-examination. "Ms. Wynne, Mina said, looking at a notepad. You say Anna is easily overwhelmed, yet who coordinated the hospice care? Caroline blinked. I believe Anna made the phone calls. And who managed the medication schedule for the last 6 weeks? Anna did. And who met with the funeral director and chose the casket? Anna. So, Mina said, looking up, the woman who is too overwhelmed to manage a holding company managed the complex medical and end-of-life care of a terminal patient while you were... Where were you in October? Ms. Wynne? Caroline's jaw tightened. I was in New York. For business. Right, Mina said. You visited twice. For a total of 3 hours. I was running a company. Caroline snapped. Her mask slipped. Just for a second. And Anna was running a household. Mina said calmly. No further questions. I felt a small spark of hope. Mina was good. She was fighting the emotional narrative with logistical facts. But Klein wasn't done. Your Honor, Klein said, we have a witness who can speak to the decedent's state of mind in the final weeks. We call Brenda Miller. My stomach dropped. Brenda was one of the relief nurses who came in on weekends so I could sleep. She was a chatty woman who always talked about her credit card debt. Brenda walked in. She looked nervous. She avoided my eyes. Ms. Miller, Klein said, did you observe Richard Bell interacting with his daughter Anna? Yes. Brenda said. Her voice was small. And did Mr. Bell ever seem distressed? Brenda nodded. Yes, sometimes. When Anna would bring him papers to sign, he would get agitated. He would say, I don't want to do this right now, Anna. And she would say, You have to. Dad, we have to get this done. A murmur ran through the courtroom. He seemed pressured, Brenda added, like he just wanted to sleep. But she wouldn't let him. I stared at her. The papers she was talking about were insurance forms. If we didn't sign them, the hospice coverage would have lapsed. I was begging him to sign them so we wouldn't lose the hospital bed. Mina stood up slowly. She walked toward Brenda. Ms. Miller, Mina said pleasantly, you were a contract nurse, correct? Yes. And how many hours a week were you at the Bell residence? 8 hours, Saturdays only. So you saw a fraction of the week. Tell me, Ms. Miller, when did Mr. Klein's office first contact you? Brenda hesitated. A few weeks ago. And did you meet with them? Yes. Did they compensate you for your time? Brenda looked at Klein. Klein stared straight ahead. They paid me a consulting fee, Brenda said. For my time, because I had to miss work to meet them. I see, Mina said. And how much was this consulting fee? Brenda turned red. $2,000. $2,000? Mina repeated. To tell us that a dying man didn't like signing insurance paperwork? Objection, Klein barked. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Vance said. But she was looking at Brenda with a new expression. Skepticism. Mina sat down. The damage was done. The independent witness had a price tag. Judge Vance clasped her hands. I have heard enough for today. Mr. Klein, your request for an emergency removal of the executor is denied. I let out a breath I'd been holding for an hour. However, the judge continued, raising a finger. The allegations of financial complexity are noted. I am ordering limited discovery. Ms. Wynne is entitled to review the books of Bellridge Holdings to ensure the assets are secure, but I am not appointing a third-party administrator at this time. Ms. Bell remains in control. It was a win, a messy, partial win, but a win. As the bailiff called, all rise. I turned to look at the gallery behind me. That was when I saw him. Sitting in the very back row, near the heavy double doors, was Elliot Morrow. The compliance officer from Sable Fiduciary Services wore a gray raincoat over his gray suit. He sat perfectly still. He wasn't taking notes. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just watching. His eyes met mine. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply observed, like a scientist watching a reaction in a petri dish. I turned back around quickly. Seeing him there made it real. The mechanism wasn't just a legal clause. It was a person, and he was waiting for us to fail. We walked out of the courthouse into a biting wind. Caroline and her team were already clustered near their cars, talking in low, urgent tones. Caroline looked furious. She was gesturing sharply with her gloved hand. "Cutting the air. She needs something bigger," Mina said, lighting a cigarette the moment we hit the sidewalk. "She thought the nurse would bury you. The judge didn't buy it. So what happens now?" I asked. "Now she goes hunting," Mina said. "She's going to tear Belridge Holdings apart looking for that missing money she thinks exists." I drove straight to the Belridge office. I needed to feel like I was actually in charge, like I was doing the job my father had left me. Mrs. Halloway was waiting for me. She looked more anxious than usual. "Anna," she said as soon as I walked in, "we have a problem." She led me to her desk and pointed at a computer screen. "It's the Greenridge file again," she said. "There's a scheduled payment. It's flagged as critical compliance." I leaned in. The screen showed a pending transfer. $75,000, payable to Greenridge Supply Company. Due date, tomorrow. "What is this for?" I asked. "That's the problem," Mrs. Halloway said. "The invoice just says, matching grant obligation, cycle 4. But if we don't pay it, the contract says the underlying asset enters default." "What underlying asset?" "I don't know." She threw up her hands. "The file is incomplete." "But your father always paid this. Always. He used to say, 'Mary, the lights go out if we miss the Greenridge date.'" I stared at the screen. $75,000. The company had the money in its operating account, barely. But I was under a microscope. "If I pay this," I said, "Caroline will see it. She's auditing the books starting next week. She'll see I sent $75,000 to a company she's already suspicious of. She'll claim I'm dissipating assets. She'll claim I'm stealing. But if you don't pay it," Mrs. Halloway said, "we might lose whatever this contract protects." I felt the walls closing in. It was a trap. If I paid, I gave Caroline ammunition. If I didn't pay, I failed my father's critical compliance. "I need to think." I said, "Don't send it yet." I spent the rest of the afternoon in my father's office at the company. It was a dusty room with a view of the train tracks. I went through every filing cabinet. I found invoices for lumber, for roofing tar, for plumbing supplies, but nothing that explained why Greenridge Supply Company was receiving a yearly grant. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of grief. I wasn't a CEO, I was an illustrator. I drew pictures for children's books. I didn't know how to navigate corporate espionage. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my father's voicemails, the ones I had saved. I found one from 2 months ago. It was late at night. His voice sounded raspy, tired. "Anna, it's Dad. I just wanted to hear your voice. I know things are going to get hard. I'm sorry for that. But listen to me. If she drags you into court, don't chase her. Don't get into the mud with her. Follow the paper. Honey, just follow the paper. The truth is in the ledger, not the arguments. I love you." I played it again. Follow the paper. He wasn't talking about the will. He was talking about the business. He knew Caroline would come for the money. He wanted me to look at the ledger. I looked at the invoice on the desk again. Cycle 4. If there was a cycle 4, there was a cycle 1. I called Mrs. Halloway back in. "Go back to the archives." I said, "Find the very first payment to Greenridge. Find out when it started." She nodded and ran out. I sat back in the chair. The leather was cold. I missed him so much it hurt to breathe. This wasn't a game to me. This was his voice, his life, his secrets, and I was the only one left to guard them. 3 days later, the other shoe dropped. Mina called me at 7 in the morning. "Check your email," she said. Her voice was tight. I opened my laptop. There was a new notification from the court system. Motion for forensic accounting and temporary restraining order. I opened the document. Caroline's team wasn't playing nice anymore. Petitioner alleges that the executor has concealed significant assets within the Belridge Holdings structure. Specifically, petitioner has identified irregular transfers to an entity known as Greenridge Supply Company, which appear to be fraudulent conveyances designed to lower the estate's value. "She found it," I whispered. She didn't just find it, Mina said. She's weaponizing it. She's claiming Greenridge is a shell company you and your father used to hide cash. She's asking the judge to freeze Belridge's operating accounts entirely. If she freezes the accounts, I can't pay the obligation today. I said, exactly, Mina said. She's choking you out. We have a hearing this afternoon. Judge Vance hauled us back in. This afternoon? She's treating it as an emergency. Anna, you need to be ready. They are going to come at you hard. The courtroom was fuller this time. Word had gotten out. In Marrow Glen. A family fight over money was better than cable television. Judge Vance looked tired. She rubbed her temples as we sat down. Mr. Klein, she said, you have filed a motion alleging fraud. That is a serious word. It is a serious situation. Your Honor, Klein said. He held up a sheaf of papers. We have uncovered a pattern of payments to a supplier in Pennsylvania, Greenridge Supply Company, that correspond to no known inventory or services. These are payments for nothing, phantom transactions, and the executor is poised to send another $75,000 today. We are asking the court to stop that transfer. Judge Vance looked at Mina. Ms. Crowell? Your Honor, Mina said, Belridge Holdings is an active business. Stopping ordinary course payments will breach contracts. What contract? Klein interrupted. There is no written contract on file. We checked. It's a handshake deal for $75,000. That's not business, Your Honor. That's theft. I felt the heat rising in my face. It wasn't theft. It was something else, but I couldn't prove it. Judge Vance looked at me. Ms. Bell, do you have a contract for this vendor? I stood up. My legs felt weak. Your Honor, my father? He had many verbal agreements. He was a man of his word. The judge's expression didn't soften. Verbal agreements do not hold up well in probate. Ms. Bell, I looked at Caroline. She was watching me with that same sad, superior expression. Poor Anna. She doesn't know what she's doing. I am inclined to grant the temporary restraining order, Judge Vance said, until the nature of Greenridge Supply Company is determined. No funds shall leave Belridge Holdings. No. I thought, if the payment stops, the default triggers, whatever the guardrails were, they would break. Your Honor, please. I said, it's a compliance issue. If it is legitimate compliance, Ms. Bell, you can produce the paperwork, Judge Vance said sternly. Until then, the accounts are frozen. Klein smiled. It was a small, tight victory smile. The judge picked up her gavel. We will set a full evidentiary hearing for Friday to resolve the status of these assets. Until then? The side door of the courtroom opened. It wasn't a loud noise, but the heavy thud of the door swing made heads turn. A man walked in. It was the same man from the steps, the man in the black suit. He moved with a silence that was unnerving. He walked past the gallery, past the bar, straight toward the bailiff's station. The bailiff, a burly man named Frank who usually stopped everyone, didn't move to block him. He looked at the man, hesitated, and stepped back. The man in the black suit held out an envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, and sealed with a dark red wax stamp. He handed it to the bailiff, then turned and looked at Judge Vance. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Judge Vance froze. She was in the middle of lifting her gavel. Her hand stopped in midair. Her eyes locked on the man, then on the envelope in the bailiff's hand. The color drained from her face. It was subtle, but I saw it. The irritation vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp wariness. "Bring that here," she said to the bailiff. Her voice was quiet. Frank carried the envelope up to the bench. Judge Vance took it. She looked at the seal. She didn't open it immediately. She touched the wax with her thumb. She looked at the man in black again. He was standing by the railing, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. "Counsel," Judge Vance said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a tired county judge. It was the voice of someone who had just realized there was a bomb in the room. To the bench, now, Darrow Klein looked confused. He exchanged a glance with Caroline, then walked up. Mina grabbed her notepad and followed. I stayed at the table, watching. The courtroom was dead silent. The man in the black suit turned his head slowly and looked at me. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark and flat. It wasn't a look of support, it was a look of assessment. He was measuring me. Judge Vance leaned over the bench, whispering furiously to the lawyers. I saw Klein recoil. I saw Mina's eyes go wide. The game had changed. The guardrails my father built weren't just paperwork. They were here, in the room, wearing a black suit and stopping a judge in her tracks. The chambers of Judge Lenora H. Vance were not designed for high drama. They were designed for quiet settlements and the dull scratching of pens on paper. The room was cramped, smelling of old coffee and the dust of law books that hadn't been opened since 1998. But the silence in the room now was heavy enough to crush a lung. Judge Vance sat behind her desk, which was cluttered with family photos and case files. She held the cream-colored envelope in her hands. She had opened it. The single sheet of paper inside lay flat on her blotter. Darrow Klein stood by the window, his usual polish chipping away. Mina Crowell sat in one of the two guest chairs, her notebook open but her pen hovering in the air. I stood near the door, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Judge Vance looked up. She took off her reading glasses and set them down with a deliberate click. "Counsel," she said. Her voice was stripped of the irritation she had shown earlier. It was now flat, professional, and very careful. This court has received a notice of activation regarding a dormant instrument attached to the Bell estate. Klein stepped forward. "Your Honor, with respect, we have not been served with this notice. We have no idea what this is. We have a motion pending to freeze. Your motion is moot. Mr. Klein." The judge cut in. She didn't raise her voice, but the authority in her tone was absolute. As of this moment, the jurisdiction of this court regarding the discretionary distribution of assets is suspended. Suspended? Klein's voice rose an octave. "Your Honor, this is a probate proceeding. You cannot suspend jurisdiction based on a letter delivered by a courier in the middle of a hearing. I demand to see the document." Judge Vance placed her hand over the paper. "You will see what is required by statute. Mr. Klein, this is a certified notification from a special fiduciary. It indicates that the conditions for an independent oversight trust have been met." She looked at Caroline, who was standing next to Klein. Caroline looked pale. Her hands were gripping her expensive leather bag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Ms. Wynne," the judge said, "did you or your counsel conduct a full search of the dormant liability structures of Belridge Holdings before you filed your petition for fraud?" Caroline blinked. We reviewed the active accounts, but not the dormant ones. We didn't know there were dormant ones." Klein interjected. "Ignorance is not a defense against a trigger clause." The judge said. She looked back at the paper. "This notice informs the court that a special fiduciary has been appointed to secure the assets. This is no longer a dispute between two sisters. It is a matter of compliance with a pre-existing trust instrument." Klein slammed his hand on the windowsill. "This is absurd. It's a stalling tactic. Anna is bringing in some shadow firm to delay the audit. We object. We object strenuously." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Klein, if you pound on my furniture again, I will hold you in contempt. And let me be clear, the seal on this document does not come from a shadow firm. It comes from an oversight body that this court recognizes. The objection is overruled." She looked at me. "Ms. Bell," she said, "the special fiduciary is waiting in the conference room next door. He has requested a meeting with both parties. Immediately." We walked out of chambers into the fluorescent hum of the hallway. The air felt thin. Caroline grabbed Klein's arm. "What is going on?" she hissed. "What is a special fiduciary?" "I don't know," Klein muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's some kind of poison pill. Your father must have buried it deep." Mina leaned close to me. "Anna," she whispered, "did you know about this?" I shook my head. "Not really. I knew there was a mechanism, but I didn't know it would stop a judge." We entered the conference room. It was a sterile box with a long laminate table. Elliot Morrow was there, standing by the whiteboard, and sitting at the head of the table was the man in the black suit. Up close, he looked even more unreadable. He was perhaps 50 years old, with hair the color of iron and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He had no files in front of him, no laptop, just his hands, folded on the table. Elliot Morrow cleared his throat. "Good afternoon," he said. "I believe introductions are in order. I am Elliot Morrow, Compliance Officer for Sable Fiduciary Services, and this is Mr. Marcus Hale." The man in the black suit didn't stand up. He simply nodded. "Mr. Hale has been appointed as the special fiduciary for the Bell estate," Elliot continued. "Effective immediately. All decision-making power regarding the assets of Bellridge Holdings and the personal estate of Richard Bell is vested in his office." Klein stepped forward, regaining some of his bluster. "Now wait a minute," Klein said. "You can't just walk in here and seize control. My client is the primary liquid beneficiary. We demand to see the trust instrument. We demand a hearing to determine the validity of this appointment." Marcus Hale turned his head slowly to look at Klein. "Mr. Klein," Hale said. His voice was soft, barely a murmur, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "The validity of my appointment is not a subject for debate. It is a contractual certainty triggered by your client's filing of a fraud allegation without forensic proof." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Sit down." Klein hesitated. He looked at Caroline. Caroline looked terrified. They sat. Hale looked at me. "Ms. Bell, please." I sat down next to Mina. "My role is simple," Hale said. "I am here to prevent the destruction of value." The deceased established a protocol if the estate was challenged in a manner that threatened its solvency. Control would shift to a neutral party to ensure that all obligations, public and private, are met. He looked at Caroline. "Ms. Wynne, you have alleged that assets are missing. You have alleged that your sister is concealing funds. Because of these accusations, you have forced an activation of the Greenridge Protocol." Caroline frowned. "Greenridge? That's just a supply company." Hale's expression didn't change. "Greenridge is a liability anchor," he said, "and because you have pulled on the chain, you have now alerted the creditors." "Creditors?" Caroline whispered. "What creditors?" Hale ignored her. He turned to Mina. "Ms. Crowell, I am issuing an immediate preservation order. No documents, physical or digital, are to be removed from the Bellridge offices. No emails are to be deleted. No ledgers are to be altered." "We have already been preserving records," Mina said defensively. "Good," Hale said. "Then you will have no objection to my team securing the physical premises tonight. We will change the locks at Bellridge Holdings at 6 o'clock. "Change the locks?" I said. "But that's my father's office. I work there. Not anymore." "Ms. Bell," Hale said, "not until I certify that the books are clean. You are the executor, yes, but you are also a suspect in the fraud investigation initiated by your sister. I must treat you as such." He looked back at Caroline. "And you, Ms. Wynne, you are the petitioner. You have opened a door that cannot be easily closed. My team will also be reviewing your communications regarding the estate to determine if your fraud allegations were made in good faith or as a tactical maneuver." "My communications?" Caroline gasped. "You can't do that. Attorney-client privilege does not apply to the dissemination of false financial data to the court." Hale finished. "If you knowingly presented false numbers to Judge Vance, that is spoliation of the judicial process. I will find out." He stood up. The meeting was over. "Judge Vance will issue the formal order within the hour." Hale said, "Do not go to the office. Ms. Bell, do not access the bank accounts. Ms. Wynne, if you attempt to move a single dollar, I will have you both held in contempt." He walked out of the room, followed by Elliot. The door clicked shut. We sat in silence. The air conditioner hummed. Caroline put her head in her hands. "What have we done?" she whispered. I looked at her. "You did this." I said, "You wanted a fight. You got a war." That night, I couldn't go to the office. I couldn't go to the bank. I felt trapped in the house on Elm Street, surrounded by ghosts. I needed to understand. Green Ridge is a liability anchor. That's what Hale had said. I went to my father's study. I had copies of the ledger pages I had taken before the lockout. I spread them out on the floor. Green Ridge Supply Company. I traced the payments again. Every year. Matching funds. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Not for the company, but for the address on the invoices. 1402 Mill Road, Eldermark, Pennsylvania. I looked at the satellite view. It was a warehouse. A nondescript metal building in a valley that looked like it had been forgotten by time. I searched for Eldermark Community Initiative. Nothing. I searched for Richard Bell Eldermark, and then, deep in the archives of a scanned local newspaper from 20 years ago, I found a blurb. Local businessman pledges support for retraining program. The article was tiny. Richard Bell, owner of Belridge Holdings, has announced a partnership with regional suppliers to create a grant specifically for the retraining of workers displaced by the mine closure in Eldermark. Retraining. I looked at the ledger again. Restricted grant matching obligation. He wasn't buying supplies. He was funding a pension. Or a safety net. But then I saw the note again. Shortfall covered by silent backer. If my father was funding a charitable initiative, why did he need a silent backer? And why was it a liability? I kept digging. I searched for Belridge Holdings guarantee. I found a PDF of a town council meeting minutes from Marrow Glen. Dated 15 years ago, Mr. Bell clarified that the liquidity of Belridge Holdings serves as the collateral for the Eldermark commitment. If Belridge fails to meet the matching line, the principal becomes due immediately. I sat back, staring at the screen. It wasn't just a donation. It was a debt. My father had pledged the assets of his company to guarantee this fund. If the payment stopped, like the payment Caroline had just blocked, the entire principal amount would be called in. And how much was the principal? I looked at the shortfall note. Gap. $200,000. Covered by S.B. If a shortfall was $200,000, the principal had to be in the millions. If the silent backer called in the debt, or if the Eldermark Fund demanded payment. Belridge Holdings would be bankrupt. The estate would be worth nothing. The $4 million Caroline wanted? Gone. The house? Gone. My father had built a house of cards, and he was the only one holding it up. And now, Caroline had kicked the table. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window. It was the Range Rover. Caroline. I didn't want to talk to her. I wanted to lock the door and scream, but I knew she wouldn't leave. I opened the front door before she could knock. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a camel hair coat. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Why? So you can look for more things to sue me over?" "No," she said. Her voice broke. "No lawyers. Please, Anna, I need to sit down." I stepped back. She walked into the hallway. She didn't look at the peeling paint or the stack of mail. She walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. Keeping her coat on, I sat in the armchair opposite her. "He locked us out," she said. "That man, Hale. He froze my personal accounts too. Did you know that? He said because I commingled funds with the estate during the funeral costs. He has the right to audit my personal checking." "I didn't know." I said. Caroline laughed. A brittle, jagged sound. "Mark is going to kill me. He told me to settle. He told me to let you have the company." "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Why is this so important to you?" "Caroline, you have everything. You have the penthouse in New York. You have the summer house. You have the career. Why do you need this?" She looked at me. The mask was gone. In its place was sheer, naked panic. "I don't have everything," she whispered. "What?" "I don't have the money. Anna, it's gone." I stared at her. "What do you mean? It's gone? You're an executive. I made bad bets." She interrupted. Her words came out fast, rushing over each other. 2 years ago, I leveraged everything into a tech startup that imploded. Then I tried to cover it with margin loans. Then the market turned. She took a breath, her chest heaving. I'm underwater. Anna, I'm so far underwater I can't see the surface. The board at Windcrest is reviewing my financials next month. It's a standard fiduciary review. If they see my personal insolvency, I lose my seat. I lose my license. I lose everything. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I needed the estate to cover the margin call. I needed the liquid assets, the $4 million, to plug the hole before the audit. And I needed control of Belridge because I could borrow against it. You were going to leverage the company? I asked, horror rising in my throat. I was going to save myself, she cried, and I would have paid it back. I just needed time. But Dad, he gave the control to you, to the one person who wouldn't understand how to use the leverage. So you sued me. I said, you accused me of manipulating a dying man because you were bad at math? I accused you because I was desperate, she shouted. Then she slumped back, covering her face. God, Anna, you don't know what it's like. To have everyone look at you and see success when you know you're one check away from ruin. I watched her. I saw the sister I had grown up with, the one who always had to be perfect, the one who polished her trophies and hid her failures. I felt a pang of empathy. It was sharp and unwelcome. She was terrified. But then I remembered the subpoena for my therapy records. I remembered the gossip page. I remembered her telling me my memory of the ocean was wrong. You're drowning. Caroline, I said quietly, I get that. But you tried to use me as a flotation device, and you didn't care if I went under. I would have taken care of you. She sobbed into her hands. I offered you $500,000. You offered me a bribe with money you didn't have. She looked up. Her mascara was smeared. Help me, Anna, please. We have to get rid of this fiduciary. We have to get Hale out. If he digs into my finances, if he sees why I needed the money, he'll report it to the court. It will be public record. My board will see it. Mark will see it. My life ends. She reached out a hand. If we drop the lawsuit, if we tell the judge we settled, Hale goes away. Right? We can just split it. You take the house, I take the cash. We walk away. I looked at her hand. It was shaking. It was a tempting offer. End the war. Send the man in the black suit away. Go back to being sisters, or at least strangers who didn't sue each other. But I thought of the ledger. I thought of the silent backer. I thought of the liability anchor. We can't. I said, what? The trust is activated. Caroline. We can't just say, never mind. Hale isn't working for us. He's working for the instrument. He won't leave until he's done. Caroline stared at me. Her eyes hardened. You want this? She said. You want to see me fall? No, I said. I want to survive. And right now, you're the one who sank the ship. She stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Fine, she said. Her voice was cold again. If I go down, Anna, I am taking the reputation of this family with me. You remember that. She walked out. I locked the door behind her. I leaned against the wood, my heart pounding. It was raw, and it was human, and it was tragic, but it didn't change the math. She was dangerous. The next morning, my phone rang at 8 o'clock. It was a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Bell. A voice said. It was calm, low, and terrifying. This is Marcus Hale. Mr. Hale, I stammered. I require your presence at the Belridge offices at 9 o'clock. I have some questions regarding the routing instructions for the Green Ridge account. I'll be there. I drove to the office. The locks had indeed been changed. A security guard stood by the door. He checked my ID before letting me in. Inside, the office was silent. Mrs. Halloway and the staff were gone. Sent home. Presumably. Marcus Hale was sitting at Mrs. Halloway's desk. He had the ledger open. He also had a stack of bank records that I had never seen before. Sit, he said. I sat in the chair usually reserved for delivery drivers. Ms. Bell, Hale said, not looking up from the page. When did you first become aware of the silent backer notation in your father's ledger? Yesterday, I said. After the hearing, I was looking through the copies I made. You had no prior knowledge? No. Your father never discussed a secondary source of funding for the Eldermark grant? No. He just said the business had obligations. Hale turned a page. He looked at me then. His eyes were like X-rays. Ms. Wynne claims she knew nothing of this either. She claims she believed the company was flush with cash. She didn't know. I said, she hasn't looked at these books in years. Hale nodded slowly. Ignorance seems to be the family trade. He pushed a paper across the desk. This is a routing instruction, he said. It is dated 3 days before your father died. It directs a payment of $200,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands? I said, Dad didn't have offshore accounts. The instruction is signed by Richard Bell. Hale said, but the signature is shaky. He pointed to the bottom of the page. However, the transfer was canceled, stopped by the bank's fraud algorithm. Okay, I said, so the money is still here? The money is here, Hale said, but the obligation it was meant to cover is not. That $200,000 was the shortfall payment, because it wasn't sent. The guarantee is now technically in default. He leaned back, but here is the inconsistency. Ms. Bell, the fraud alert wasn't triggered by the destination. It was triggered by the user login. The login? Someone accessed your father's online banking to initiate this transfer, but they did it from an IP address that does not match your father's home, and it does not match this office. Where did it match? I asked. It matched a public Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop, the Lark Lumen Cafe. I froze. Lark Lumen. Caroline. I whispered. Hale watched me. Ms. Wynne was in New York 3 days before your father died, he said, according to her testimony. But if she was in Marrow Glen, if she was at that cafe, trying to move money out of the company before the will was read. He let the sentence hang in the air. That would be theft. I said, that would be a felony. Hale corrected, and it would be grounds for immediate disinheritance. He closed the ledger. But there is a second possibility. Ms. Bell. What? That you were at the cafe? You live here. You frequent that establishment. I was at the hospice. I cried. I was with him. Can you prove it? Hale asked. Can you prove you weren't drinking a latte and trying to wire $200,000 to an offshore account to hide it from your sister? I stared at him. He wasn't on my side. He wasn't on anyone's side. He was just looking for the rot. I have the hospice logs. I said, I signed in every day. Hale nodded. Good. Provide them. He stood up. There is one more thing. Ms. Bell. Yes? The silent backer. I have traced the origins of the matching funds. They do not come from a bank. They do not come from a charity. Where do they come from? Hale looked at the window, at the gray sky outside. They come from a private trust, a trust that is managed by a very old, very aggressive law firm in Philadelphia. If this estate defaults on the Green Ridge guarantee, that trust has the right to seize Belridge Holdings. He looked back at me. Your inheritance isn't just a company, Ms. Bell. It is a hostage, and the ransom note is coming due in 48 hours. He checked his watch. I have to report these findings to Judge Vance. You should prepare yourself. The next hearing will not be about who gets the house. It will be about who goes to prison. The discovery process is usually a slow excavation of boring truths, but under the watch of Marcus Hale. It felt like an autopsy performed at high speed. The Belridge offices had been turned into a secure facility. I was allowed in only during business hours, and only under supervision. I sat at a temporary desk in the conference room, staring at a document that Mina had just handed me. It was a contingency agreement. Dated 12 years ago, the paper was yellowing at the edges, but the signature was unmistakably my father's, sharp, jagged, and final. It was a restricted covenant of control. I read the legal density 3 times before the meaning settled in my stomach like a stone. The agreement tied the voting shares of Belridge Holdings, the 60% I had inherited, directly to the compliance of the Green Ridge Matching Fund's commitment. If Belridge failed to pay the match, the voting rights didn't just freeze, they reverted Reverted to whom? I asked Mina. She pointed to a redacted line at the bottom of the page. To the holder of the debt, she said, the silent backer. I looked at the document again. My father hadn't just given me a company. He had given me a bomb with a very sensitive trigger. And look at the structure. Anna, Mina said, her voice quiet. Look at how he separated the assets. I followed her finger. The agreement explicitly excluded personal liquid assets held outside the corporate entity from the collateral pool. I don't understand. I said, your father knew this debt was dangerous. Mina explained. He knew that if the silent backer ever called it in, or if the payments stopped, the company could be seized. So he built a firewall. She pulled out a copy of the will. He gave Caroline the cash. Mina said, $4 million, safe, untouchable, even if Belridge implodes tomorrow. Caroline keeps her money. Her inheritance is risk-free. And mine? I asked. Yours is the risk, Mina said gently. He gave you the control seat because he needed someone to stand in front of the train. If Caroline had inherited the company, with her history of leveraging assets, she would have tried to borrow against it. I finished. She would have triggered the covenant immediately. The silent backer would have taken everything. Exactly. Mina sat back, looking at me with a new respect. He didn't give you the company because he loved you more. He gave it to you because he trusted you to carry the burden. He was protecting Caroline from her own ambition, and he was using you to do it. I felt a sudden, hot rush of tears. It wasn't the warm grief of loss. It was the stinging grief of being seen. My father knew Caroline would take the money and run. He knew I would stay and fight the fire. He didn't leave me a fortune. I whispered, he left me a job. The courtroom 2 days later was frigid. The heating system in the old municipal building was failing, and everyone was wearing their coats. Caroline sat with her legal team, looking like a statue carved from ice. She refused to look at me. Her team, however, was in a frenzy. Darrow Klein stood up as soon as Judge Vance banged her gavel. Your Honor, he boomed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. We move to disqualify the special fiduciary, Mr. Marcus Hale, on the grounds of bias and overreach. Judge Vance raised an eyebrow. Bias? Mr. Klein? Mr. Hale has seized the corporate offices. Klein argued, he has locked out the rightful heirs' representatives. He is treating a civil dispute like a criminal investigation. His actions are prejudicial against my client, implying wrongdoing where there is only concern. Marcus Hale stood up. He didn't boom. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted his cuffs and spoke in that low, terrifying monotone. Your Honor, the activation of the Green Ridge Protocol is automatic. It is rule-bound. It does not have feelings, and it does not have bias. It responds to data. What data? Klein snapped. You're fishing. Hale picked up a single sheet of paper from his table. This data, he said. He walked to the bailiff and handed over the paper. The bailiff walked it to the judge. Judge Vance looked at it. Her expression tightened. What is this, Mr. Hale? She asked. It is a digital forensic log, Hale said, turning to look at Caroline. It details a series of search queries made from a laptop registered to Ms. Caroline Wynne. Caroline went rigid. The dates of these searches are significant, Hale continued. They begin 4 months ago, 6 weeks before Richard Bell died. And what was she searching for? The judge asked. Hale looked at the ceiling, reciting from memory, Greenridge Supply Company, solvency, Belridge Holdings debt structure, how to force a forensic audit of an estate, piercing the corporate veil. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Ms. Wynne was not, as she claimed in her initial petition, surprised by the complexity of the estate. Hale said, she was researching the specific vulnerabilities of her father's company while he was on his deathbed. She suspected there was hidden leverage, and she planned this lawsuit as a retrieval mission to extract the value before the debt could swallow it. Klein looked at Caroline, for the first time. He looked unsure. Is this true? The judge asked Caroline directly. Caroline stood up. Her hands were shaking. but her chin was high. I was doing due diligence, Your Honor. I knew my father was making bad decisions. I was trying to prepare. You were preparing to gut the company, Hale said calmly. You were looking for the loose thread so you could pull it. Objection! Klein shouted. Speculation. Denied. Judge Vance said. Her voice was cold. The motion to disqualify the special fiduciary is denied. Mr. Hale remains in control. And Mr. Klein? If your client attempts to interfere with his investigation again, I will sanction her. As we filed out of the courtroom, I looked at Caroline. She looked trapped. She had tried to paint me as the villain, but Hale had just turned on the lights and revealed her holding the knife. I needed to see it. I needed to see the anchor that was dragging us all down. The next morning, I drove to Pennsylvania. Eldermark was a town that time had chewed up and spit out. It sat in a valley of rust and gray trees, the skeletal remains of old coal breakers rising from the mist like monuments to a dead religion. 1402. Mill Road was at the end of a street lined with houses that had boarded up windows. Green Ridge Supply Company was not a shell company. It was a massive, sprawling brick warehouse with a new roof and a fleet of delivery trucks parked in the lot. I parked my car and walked to the front office. The sign on the door was modest. Green Ridge Supply, Est, 1950. I walked inside. A bell chimed. The receptionist was a young woman, bright-eyed and efficient. Can I help you? I'm Anna Bell. I said, Richard Bell's daughter. The woman's smile froze. She picked up the phone immediately. Mr. Henderson? She said into the receiver. She's here. A moment later, a heavy metal door opened, and a man walked out. He was in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, but his eyes were sharp. Ms. Bell, he said. He didn't offer his hand. I'm Jim Henderson, operations manager. I'd like to talk to you about my father. I said. Henderson sighed. He looked at the receptionist, then jerked his head toward the door. Come on back. His office was a glass box overlooking the warehouse floor. Below us, forklifts beeped, and men in hard hats moved pallets of lumber. It was a real business. It was alive. Your father was a good man, Henderson said, sitting behind a metal desk. He saved this place. Saved it? 20 years ago, Henderson said. The mine closed. Everyone was leaving. The town was dying. Your dad stepped in. He guaranteed the pension fund. He set up the matching grant so we could retrain the guys who were too old to learn code but too young to retire. I looked at the busy floor below. So the money, the $75,000 a year, it goes to them? It goes to the retraining trust. Henderson said, it pays for trade school, welding, carpentry. It kept 200 families in their homes. Ms. Bell, but there's a debt. I said, a contingency. Henderson's face closed down. The shutters went up behind his eyes. I can't talk about that. Why not? Because the deal wasn't just with us. He said, your dad. He had help, big help, and the people who helped him. They value their privacy, the silent backer. I said, Henderson stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray hills. Look, Ms. Bell, we just want to do our work. We just want to keep the lights on. If that lawsuit of yours exposes the arrangement, the whole thing collapses. The backer walks away. The guarantee fails. This warehouse closes. And this town dies. Again. He turned back to me. Your sister sent investigators here last month. He said, we told them nothing. We sent them away. But you have his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Don't let her break the seal. Anna, if the court forces the backer to reveal himself, you won't like who walks through that door. Who is it? I asked. Please. Henderson shook his head. I can't. I signed a paper. Your dad signed a paper. Just pay the match. Keep the contract valid. And keep your sister away from the ledger. I walked back to my car with the weight of 200 families on my shoulders. My father hadn't just been hiding a debt. He had been hiding a miracle. And now, I was the only thing standing between that miracle and the legal wrecking ball my sister was swinging. When I got back to Marrow Glen, Mina was waiting for me at her office. She had a bottle of whiskey on her desk and 2 paper cups. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I saw a town that my father is keeping on life support." I sat down and told her everything. Mina listened, pouring the whiskey. When I finished, she slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Well, this fits," she said. "What is it?" I dug up an old personnel file from Belridge. It's a memo from a former accountant, a guy named Arthur Pym. He died 5 years ago. I picked up the memo. It was typed on onion skin paper. Dated 1999. Memo to R. Bell. Subject: Liquidity concerns. Richard: I have reviewed the proposed structure for the Elder Mark guarantee. While the intention is noble, the exposure is catastrophic. If an audit ever reveals the source of the secondary funding, the reputational fallout will not be limited to the company. It will affect the judiciary. It will affect the State House. The judiciary? I looked up at Mina. The source isn't a bank, Mina said grimly, and it isn't a charity. If exposing it would affect the judiciary and the State House, we are talking about dirty money, Anna, or political money, or something so old and powerful that it doesn't want to be named. My father wouldn't take dirty money, I said defensively. Desperate men do desperate things, Mina said. If he wanted to save that town, and no bank would give him the loan, maybe he went to someone who doesn't ask for collateral, but asks for favors. I thought of the contingency agreement. Control reverts to the holder of the debt. If the debt holder is someone dangerous, I said, and Caroline forces a default, then a criminal enterprise, or a political machine, takes control of your father's company. Mina finished, and your sister gets her $4 million, and you get left holding the bag for laundering money. I felt sick. The whiskey burned my throat, but it didn't settle my stomach. We have to stop her. I said, we have to stop the lawsuit before it gets to the final hearing. How? Mina asked. She's not going to back down. She's terrified of her own board. I have to make her back down. I didn't call Caroline. I sent her a text. Dad's study. Tonight, 9 p.m. Alone. She was there at 8:55. She looked worse than she had in court. Her skin was papery. Her eyes hollow. She wore a tracksuit, which was more shocking than if she had arrived naked. Caroline Wynne never wore sweatpants. I poured her a glass of wine. She took it with shaking hands. "You went to Eldermark," she said. My investigator told me. I did. And it's real. Caroline, it's a warehouse full of people who have jobs because of Dad. And if you keep pushing this, they lose everything. Caroline laughed, a harsh barking sound. I don't care about a bunch of coal miners in Pennsylvania. Anna, I care about my life. Your life is already a mess, I said quietly. But you can still save your name. She looked at me over the rim of the glass. What do you mean? I mean, I know why you're doing this. I know about the margin calls. I know about the board review. She flinched. You told Hale? No. I said, not yet. She lowered the glass slowly. I have a proposition, Caroline said. Her voice was steadying, shifting back into negotiation mode. Go on. You give me the controlling interest. You sign it over. Tonight, I use the asset to secure a bridge loan. I pay off my margin debt, and I survive the audit. And then what? I asked. Then I make the case disappear, she said. I tell the judge we settled. I withdraw the fraud petition. Hale goes away. The audit stops. No one looks at the Greenridge file ever again. And the debt? I asked. The silent backer? I'll refinance it, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I'll find a traditional lender. I'll clean it up. But I need the shares. Anna, I need the collateral. I looked at her. She still didn't get it. You can't refinance it, I said. No bank will touch it. That's why Dad had to go to the silent backer in the first place. I can fix it, she snapped. I'm better at this than he was. I'm better at it than you are. Just give me the company. Anna, you don't even want it. You want to paint and drink tea. Let me have the burden. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark street. You're right, I said. I don't want it. I never wanted to be a CEO. Then sign, she pleaded. But I can't give it to you, Caroline, because you don't want to save the company. You want to use it. You want to wring it dry to save your own skin. And when the silent backer comes calling, and he will, you'll sell everyone in Eldermark down the river to protect your reputation. I turned back to face her. Dad knew that. That's why he gave it to me. Not because I'm smart, but because I'm not for sale. Caroline stood up. Her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. You self-righteous little brat, she hissed. You're going to ruin us both. Hale is going to find out about the silent backer. He's going to expose it in open court. Do you think Dad's reputation will survive that? Do you think yours will? I'd rather lose the reputation than the soul. I said. Caroline threw her wineglass into the fireplace. It shattered with a spectacular crash. Fine, she spat. Then we do it the hard way. I'll see you in court on Friday. And when I'm done with you, you'll wish you had taken the check. She stormed out. I looked at the shattered glass in the hearth. It glittered in the dying light of the fire. I had chosen clarity. I had chosen truth, and I was pretty sure I had just doomed myself. The next day, Marcus Hale requested a private meeting, not at the office, at the park. He sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond, wearing his black suit despite the cold wind. He didn't look cold. He looked like part of the landscape. Ms. Bell, he said as I approached. Mr. Hale, I have completed my preliminary review, he said. I will be presenting my findings to Judge Vance tomorrow morning. And? I asked. My heart was hammering, and I have found inconsistencies that cannot be explained by clerical error, he said. The routing instruction from the cafe, the missed payment, the nature of the Green Ridge liability. He turned to look at me. His eyes were dark, devoid of judgment but full of weight. You need to understand what happens tomorrow. Ms. Bell, if I present the full scope of the liability, the court will be forced to act. The estate will be placed in receivership. The Green Ridge contract will be voided. The silent backer will be exposed. And the town? I asked. The workers? They will lose their funding. I looked at the ducks paddling in the freezing water. Is there any other way? Hale paused. He seemed to be weighing something. The trust instrument has a final clause, he said softly. It is a discretionary override. It allows the heir, you, to assume personal liability for the debt. Personal liability? You would have to pledge your own future assets. The house, your art, your life. You would effectively become the guarantor. If you do that, the court might allow the structure to remain private. But if I do that, I said, and the company fails, then you lose everything. Hale said, not just the inheritance, everything you have. He stood up. Your father expected you to decide. Ms. Bell, winning the inheritance isn't the victory, it's the trigger. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow to decide if you want to be the owner or the martyr. He walked away, leaving me alone on the bench. I went home. The house felt huge and empty. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the velvet sofa my mother had loved, the dining table where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinners before we learned to hate each other. I ended up in the hallway, standing in front of a photograph. It was a picture of the four of us, Mom, Dad, Caroline, and me. We were on a beach. Caroline was smiling, looking perfect. I was squinting at the sun, holding a shell. My father had his hand on my shoulder. I looked at his hand. It was large, capable, protective. I reached out to straighten the frame. It was slightly crooked. As I shifted it, I felt something slide behind the backing. I froze. I took the frame off the wall. I turned it over. Taped to the back, hidden between the cardboard and the velvet backing, was a small, white envelope. It didn't have my name on it. It didn't have a seal. I pulled it free. I opened it. There was a single index card inside. My father's handwriting was scrawled on it, hasty and urgent. If he appears, the court will listen. But you must choose what happens after. If you embrace the debt, you embrace the shadow. But remember, Anna, shadows only exist where there is light. He will ask you for a name. Give him only one. There was no signature. just the terrifying clarity of a man speaking from beyond the grave. He, Marcus Hale. My father knew he would come. He knew I would be standing here, holding this letter, facing a choice between safety and ruin. I looked at the photo again, at the version of us that was happy. Caroline wanted the money to save her image. I wanted the company to save a town. But the price of saving the town was becoming the thing my father feared, a debtor to a ghost. I put the card in my pocket. I put the frame back on the wall. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and I would either win or I would destroy us all. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the clock tick toward 9, waiting for the sun to rise on the day I would finally grow up. The final evidentiary hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, but the courtroom was full by 8:30 in Marrow Glen. The spectacle of a family destroying itself was a spectator sport, and the Bell case had become the main event. I arrived early. I wore the same blue suit I had worn to the first hearing, but I felt different inside it. The fabric didn't feel like a costume anymore. It felt like armor. I was exhausted. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, and my hands had a subtle, constant tremor, but my mind was clear. I wasn't the little sister anymore. I was the person holding the map. Caroline arrived 5 minutes before the gavel. She was, as always, a vision of curated perfection. She wore a cream-colored wool dress that looked soft but was likely structured with steel. Her hair was pulled back so severely it acted as a facelift. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the judge, and she certainly didn't look at me. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way her hands spasmed around her pen. I saw the tightness in her neck. She wasn't calm. She was brittle. She was a glass vase vibrating on the edge of a shelf. Marcus Hale sat at a separate table, positioned between the plaintiff and the defense like a referee in a gladiator pit. He had no team, no assistants, just a single, thick leather binder and the silence that seemed to travel with him. Judge Vance entered. The room stood. She looked tired, her face set in a grim line that suggested she knew exactly how ugly this day was going to be. "Be seated," she said. She looked at Marcus Hale. "Mr. Hale, you are the special fiduciary appointed by the trust mechanism. You have requested this time to present your final report regarding the assets and the allegations of fraud. The floor is yours." Hale stood up. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't pace. He planted his feet and spoke to the judge with the clinical detachment of a surgeon describing a tumor. "Your Honor," Hale began, "the petitioner, Ms. Wynne, alleged that the estate of Richard Bell was being looted. She alleged that $6 million was missing. She alleged that the executor, Ms. Bell, was concealing assets through a shell company known as Green Ridge Supply Company." He opened his binder. "I have completed a forensic reconstruction of the estate's financial history dating back 20 years. I have interviewed witnesses. I have traced every wire transfer, every check, and every routing instruction." He paused, letting the silence build. "The allegation of theft is false." A murmur ran through the gallery. Caroline didn't move. "There is no missing money." Hale continued. "The discrepancy in the estate's value, the missing $6 million, is not cash that was stolen. It is debt that was guaranteed." Hale held up a document. Richard Bell used the assets of Bell Ridge Holdings to underwrite a revolving credit facility for the Green Ridge Supply Company in Eldermark, Pennsylvania. This was a charitable act, structured as a commercial liability. The money didn't disappear. Your Honor, it was never there. It was a shield, pledged to protect a community of workers. He turned to look at Caroline. Ms. Wynne's petition claimed that she was acting to protect the estate from incompetence. However, the data tells a different story. Hale signaled to the bailiff, who projected a timeline onto the screen on the wall. "This timeline shows Ms. Wynne's digital activity," Hale said. "As we discussed in chambers, Ms. Wynne began researching the specific insolvency clauses of her father's company 6 weeks before his death. She contacted forensic accountants in New York. She inquired about piercing the corporate veil to access underlying collateral. Klein jumped up. Your Honor, we have already objected to this. This is privileged work product. It is evidence of intent, Judge Vance said sharply. Sit down. Mr. Klein, Hale continued, his voice relentless. Miss Wynne knew the company was leveraged. She did not know why, but she knew the liquidity was trapped. Her lawsuit was not an effort to save the estate. It was a demolition attempt. She intended to force a liquidation of Belridge Holdings, which would have triggered the guarantee, destroyed the Green Ridge Initiative, and freed up the only asset she cared about, the $4 million in liquid cash she inherited. He closed the binder. Ms. Wynne was not protecting her father's legacy. She was attempting to liquidate it to cover her own personal insolvency. The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Caroline. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of pale stone. Judge Vance cleared her throat. She looked at me. Ms. Bell, do you have anything to add regarding the management of the estate? I stood up. I looked at the judge. My father made a promise to the people of Eldermark. I said, my only goal has been to keep that promise. I haven't taken a dime. I haven't hidden a dime. I just wanted to keep the lights on. Judge Vance nodded. She looked at Caroline. Ms. Wynne, the court finds your allegations of undue influence to be without merit. The court finds your allegations of fraud to be baseless. The will of Richard Bell stands as written. Anna Bell is the rightful executor and beneficiary of the controlling interest in Belridge Holdings. It was over. I felt a wave of dizziness. I had won. The house was mine. The company was mine. Caroline had lost. But Marcus Hale was still standing. He hadn't returned to his seat. He was standing by the bench, his hand resting on a sealed envelope that I hadn't noticed before. Your Honor, Hale said. His voice changed. It was quieter now, heavier. Mr. Hale, the judge asked, I have made my ruling. That ruling addresses the civil dispute between the sisters, Hale said, but it triggers the secondary phase of the Green Ridge Protocol. Judge Vance froze. Protocol? Hale slid the envelope across the bench. Because the court has affirmed Ms. Bell's ownership of the controlling shares, and because the existence of the liability has now been placed on the public record by these proceedings, the silent backer has invoked the acceleration clause. Acceleration clause. The words hung in the air like smoke. Judge Vance opened the envelope. She read the single sheet of paper inside. Her face, which had been stern, suddenly looked very old. She looked up at Hale. Is this verified? It is certified, Hale said. What does it say? Darrow Klein demanded. Standing up, Judge Vance looked at Klein with a gaze that withered him instantly. It says, Mr. Klein, that the commercial loan guaranteeing the Green Ridge project is now due in full. Immediately, she looked at me. Ms. Bell, please approach the bench. I walked forward. My legs felt like lead. I stood next to Hale. He smelled of cold air and expensive soap. This notice comes from a private trust, Judge Vance said to me. It indicates that because the stability of the estate was challenged in court, the lender no longer considers Belridge Holdings a secure guarantor. They are calling the debt. How much? I whispered. $6 million. Hale answered. I don't have $6 million. I said, the company doesn't have it. I know. Hale said. He turned to the judge. However, the trust instrument provides an alternative, a novation. A what? I asked. A substitution. Hale explained. The debt can be restructured. The company can be saved. The workers in Eldermark can keep their funding. But the silent backer requires a new guarantor, a personal guarantor. He looked at me. You, Ms. Bell, me? You must pledge your personal inheritance, the house, your future earnings, the liquid assets you might acquire. You must personally assume the liability that your father carried, and if I don't, then Belridge Holdings enters receivership today. Hale said simply, the company is liquidated, the warehouse in Pennsylvania closes, the workers lose their pensions, and the estate is bankrupt. He paused. But you, Anna, if you walk away, you keep the house on Elm Street. The debt is corporate. not personal. If you disclaim the company shares right now, the company dies. But you survive. You go back to your life. You keep your home. You are free. I stared at him. This was the choice. This was the worst case my father had warned me about. Caroline had forced the issue by suing me. She had rung the bell that woke the dragon, and now the dragon was here, demanding a sacrifice. I looked back at Caroline. She was watching me. Her eyes were wide. She understood the math. She knew that if I walked away, the company she wanted to loot would be worthless. She would get nothing. But she also knew that if I took the deal, I was ruining my own life. I was chaining myself to a massive debt for a town I didn't live in, for people I didn't know. Judge Vance looked at me. Ms. Bell, the judge said softly, "This is highly irregular. I cannot advise you to take on a debt of this magnitude. You are the victim of this litigation. You have every right to walk away. You can disclaim the shares. The court will accept it." I looked at the judge, then I looked at Hale. My father knew this would happen. Didn't he? I asked. He hoped it wouldn't. Hale said, "But he prepared for it. He left the decision to you." I thought of the letter in the picture frame. Shadows only exist where there is light. I thought of Jim Henderson at the warehouse. You have his eyes. I thought of the 200 families who bought groceries and paid mortgages because my father had secretly carried this weight for 20 years. I looked at Caroline. If I take the debt, I said to Hale, "Does Caroline get her money?" Hale checked the paper. No, the $4 million in liquid assets will be frozen to service the first interest payment. Caroline gets nothing. I looked at my sister. She flinched. She knew what I was about to do. "I need a moment, Your Honor," I said. "The court is in recess for 15 minutes. Judge Vance said. She banged the gavel, but it sounded hollow. I walked out into the corridor. The hallway was lined with marble benches. I sat down. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clasp them together. A moment later, the door opened. Caroline walked out. She didn't have her entourage. Darrow Klein was nowhere to be seen. She walked over to where I was sitting. She didn't sit. She stood against the opposite wall, leaning her head back against the stone. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" she said. Her voice was dull. "I have to." I said, "You don't have to." Caroline said, "You heard him. You can keep the house. You can let the company burn. It's just a business. Anna, it's just bricks and money. It's people. Caroline." She laughed, but it sounded like a sob. "You always were the martyr. Dad loved that about you. He loved that you would suffer for a cause. He didn't love my suffering." I said, "He trusted my strength." Caroline turned her head to look at me. The sunlight from the high window hit her face, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes. She looked suddenly very human. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Anna," she whispered. "I was trying to survive. Mark is leaving me. The board is voting next week. I'm going to lose my seat. I'm going to be poor. You won't be poor." I said, "You just won't be rich. There's a difference." She shook her head. "Not in my world." She slid down the wall until she was crouching, her expensive dress pooling on the dirty floor. "I ruined it, didn't I?" she said. "If I hadn't filed the petition, the trust would have stayed dormant. We both could have walked away." "Yes," I said. "You rang the bell." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. It was the first time in my life I had heard her say those words and mean them. She wasn't manipulating me. She wasn't strategizing. She was just broken. I stood up and walked over to her. I crouched down. I didn't hug her. We weren't there yet. Maybe we never would be. But I reached out and touched her hand. Survival doesn't require destroying someone else. "Caroline," I said gently, "you forgot that." She squeezed my hand, her grip desperate. "Don't take the debt." "Anna," she whispered, "save yourself. Please, just let it all go." "I can't," I said. I stood up. I looked down at her one last time. "Go to New York, Caroline. Face the board. Tell the truth. Start over." I turned and walked back toward the courtroom doors. Judge Vance was waiting for me in her chambers before we went back on the record. Marcus Hale was there too. "You understand the implications?" Judge Vance asked. She had taken off her robe. She looked like a grandmother now, concerned and weary. "I understand," I said. "You are signing away your freedom. Ms. Bell, you will be working for the silent backer for the next 20 years. Every dollar that Belridge makes will go to servicing this debt. You will live in that big house, but you won't own it. The trust will own it." "I know. Why?" Judge Vance asked. "Why do this? You won. You beat your sister. You proved you were right. Why sacrifice the victory?" I looked at the sealed envelope on her desk. "Sometimes a will is a message," Judge Vance said, echoing her own thoughts. "Sometimes it's a test. It wasn't a test of competence," I said. "It was a test of character. My father didn't leave me money. He left me a choice. He wanted to know if I was strong enough to be the one who pays the bill. And are you? I guess we're going to find out." I signed the papers. The addendum was thick. I signed my name over and over again. Annabelle, 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 with every signature. I felt a weight settling onto my shoulders, heavy and permanent, but with the weight came a strange sense of grounding. I wasn't floating anymore. I was tethered to something real. Marcus Hale took the papers. He checked the signatures. He closed the folder. "It is done," he said. He looked at me. For the first time since I had seen him on the courthouse steps, the mask slipped. His eyes softened. "Just a fraction. Your father spoke highly of you." "Ms. Bell," he said. "You knew him?" I asked. "I am the silent backer's representative." Hale said, "I have known Richard Bell for 30 years. He was a man who understood that everything has a cost." He picked up his binder. "The Green Ridge facility will remain open. The funding is secured. The protocol is deactivated." "Thank you," I said. He nodded. He walked to the door, then stopped. "One more thing. Ms. Bell." "Yes?" "Your sister? The board review she is facing?" "Yes?" "The silent backer has interests in Windcrest Strategies." My heart stopped. "What does that mean?" "It means," Hale said, his voice returning to that neutral monotone, "that the report I file today regarding her conduct in this court will find its way to her board of directors by tomorrow morning." I stared at him. He was telling me that he was about to fire the kill shot. Caroline would be destroyed. "Unless?" I asked. Hale tilted his head. "Unless the new guarantor requests a stay of execution. He was giving me the power. I could let Caroline fall. I could let her lose everything she had fought so dirty to keep. It would be justice. It would be revenge. But I remembered her crouching in the hallway. "I'm sorry. Let it go," I said. Hale raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Don't send the report." I said, "Let her face the board on her own merits. Don't use this against her." Hale watched me for a long moment. He seemed to be calculating a new variable. "Mercy is an expensive luxury. Ms. Bell, especially for a debtor, I can afford it." I said. Hale nodded once. "Very well. The report will be sealed." He opened the door and walked out. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The wind had died down. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun setting behind the slate roofs of Marrow Glen. I stood on the steps and looked out at the town. It looked the same as it always had. The diner, the post office, the gas station. But I saw the invisible lines now. I saw the debts and the promises that held it all together. I took my phone out of my pocket. I played the voicemail one last time. "If she drags you into court, don't chase her. Follow the paper. The truth is in the ledger. I love you." I pressed delete. I didn't need the voicemail anymore. I knew who he was, and I knew who I was. I walked down the steps to my car. I had a company to run. I had a warehouse to visit. I had a debt to pay. I wasn't rich. I wasn't free. But as I unlocked the door of my father's old sedan and listened to the engine cough to life, I realized something. I was the only one who was safe, because I was the only one who had told the truth. I put the car in gear and drove toward Elm Street, ready to live in the house that wasn't really mine, protecting a secret that was bigger than all of us. Thank you so much for listening to My Wealthy Sister Demanded My Inheritance in Court. It has been a journey bringing Anna and Caroline's story to life, exploring how grief can turn into a battlefield and how the things we inherit aren't always what they seem. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Did you agree with Anna's final choice, or would you have walked away with the house? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, betrayal, and the long road to redemption coming soon. Thank you for your time. And until the next story,